Latvian Visiem, and before we begin, this is Otto and Joe reminding you that when you're out in Latvia swimming this summer to be very, very safe. Because as Otto and I have talked about many times before, just because a river looks calm and cool and freshing and everything, it could actually be deadly because a lot of Latvia's rivers, even though they are shallow, they can have different whirlpools and currents that you cannot see from the surface. So please be very safe when you are out swimming. Always check with local people before you go swimming anywhere, and definitely do not go swimming anywhere that you have not been or not heard of before.
Also, let me recommend you not to use any substances before going swimming, and perhaps a good advice would be to take someone along just in case you get in trouble.
So, just a quick reminder before the show begins. Latvia Weekly, your independent guide to the news in Latvia, with your hosts Otto Tabuns and Joe Horgan. Latvian Museum, and welcome to episode number 86 of the Latvia Weekly podcast. I am one of your hosts, Joe Horgan, seated next to Otto Tabuns here in Jelgava. Otto, how are you today?
Oh, hello, everyone. I'm enjoying the much fresher weather, sort of, that we are having right now. Certainly not so very sunny, not so very desert-like, a little bit of relaxation before the other time when the strong sun comes.
Yes, and we will be getting to the weather forecast at the very end today. But we want to start with, well, we have a lot of stories that we could start with today. This was quite a busy week, kind of the opposite of last week for those of you who are listening, kind of a slow news week. This week, very, very busy week. We have a lot of stuff to get through, so we have to start off right away. Now, one thing that has been forecasted for quite some time is this major announcement that was made just a couple of days ago. Now, for a little bit of background, here in Latvia, there are 6 official universities that have university status. And just to be clear, these actually have state university status, unlike up in Estonia, where there's a few universities that still have the name university, but they don't have the official state status. Otto, can you explain why is it so important to have this university status?
So, first of all, it is certainly prestige, but not only, because it also gives the specific school of higher education a number of opportunities that the other such schools do not have. The first thing that separates a university from other institutions of higher education is that it usually has more than one direction of study. For example, it would have not only, let's say, agricultural sciences, it would also have social sciences, or it would have not only social sciences, but also medicine. And it also permits university to apply for many opportunities of funding, both national and European, that, for example, some other graduate schools or other schools of applied sciences may not.
And so there are 6 universities. So there are 3 in Riga, that is Riga Technical University, Riga Stradiņš University, and University of Latvia. And University of Latvia has merged with a few other regional institutions as well. So there's filials of University of Latvia all throughout the country. And then outside of Latvia, in the 2 biggest cities of Daugavpils and Liepāja, there are universities. And then also in the 4th largest city in Latvia, where we are right now in Jelgava, we have the Latvian University of Life Sciences and Technologies, known to pretty much everybody as Latvijas Lauksaimniecības Universitāte, or University of Agriculture, which we will not get into the history. We might do a separate episode about the University of Latvia at some point, but basically this is an institution that goes all the way back. Technically, we celebrated our 150th anniversary a couple of years ago, which was very interesting counting, but the idea was that this was the same kind of institution that started out as a faculty of the university that was set up in the imperial times, and but it's a very old institution.
Yeah, well, as I'm not belonging to any of these universities, I can say that, well, originally in 1919, they established one university of Latvia, and out of it, they then established the Academy of Agriculture in 1939. And then after the war, they established the Riga Technical University and the Riga Students University as the technical and medicine faculties of the University of Latvia. So they have the same source, and perhaps now it may be the way to get it all back together. But of course, I will not get into that.
Yes. Well, so anyway, long story short, so there has been talk for years and years and years that there are too many universities here in such a small country. And so just to give you an idea of the size of these universities, so the largest is University of Latvia with about 20,000, or it's probably down to like 15,000 students the last couple of years. RTU, which I think is technically a little bit, they go back and forth over which one's bigger, Riga Technical University or University of Latvia, and then Riga Students University, which is about 8,000 students at this point, and that's the one that's very well known for its medical studies, among other things. And then the regional universities, though, are quite a bit smaller. So the largest is LLU, as we call it, the University of Life Sciences and Technologies, with about 4,000 students. And then Daugavpils and Liepāja universities both have about 2,000 students each, a little bit less for Liepāja. And there were new regulations that were passed by the ministry a couple of months ago that basically to save this university status, you have to have at least 4,000 students. And then there's a whole number of other requirements as well, such as a wide majority of your staff study staff have to have PhDs or be in PhD programs. You have to have a certain amount of PhD students in your programs. You have to have a certain amount of international students. You have to have be a certain amount on the international rankings and have a plan to get higher and everything. And I will not get into the details right now. We will do that some other time. But the long story short is that LLU fought tooth and nail to basically just barely pass the minimum requirements to be considered a university. University of Liepāja and Daugavpils University were not so successful. And so the situation for the last few months has been that they are going to lose their status, and then LLU is going to hold on to its status for who knows really how long. But the major announcement, which is something that a lot of people had been kind of whispering about, and something that even though I work at LLU as a teacher, this is not something that was widely discussed. This is something that, when I was talking to my other colleagues, kind of came as a little bit of a surprise. I mean, nobody's shocked by this, but there was an announcement by University of Daugavpils, University of Liepāja, and University of Life Sciences Technologies to form together as one unit. And this is very unclear for exactly what this will look like. So the way it was originally reported is that the three would come together as one university. Now there's a talk to come together as a consortium. So for those of you from America, for example, in Maine, we have the University of Maine system, where the main campus is in Orono. Shout out to all of those who know where Orono is. And then there's also ones in southern Maine, kind of near Portland and Gorham, and then other places throughout the state as well. And they kind of all count as one system. So I think that this cooperation agreement would be something similar to this. And then from what I understand, the study programs would be more in line with each other. So, for example, they've already been talking that if one of the three has the best engineering program, that they will go with that program. If one of the three has the best economics program, they'll go with that program. And then there'll be a lot more opportunities to collaborate for conferences and stuff like that. But it is very important. All three rectors say that the universities keep their individual identities. So, Otto, I would like to know, what is your immediate reaction for this? Because I am a little bit biased. I do work at one of these universities. I want to see, as an outside observer, what is your immediate reaction? What do you think that this impact will have on the universities, the quality of education, the quality of research that they do, because all three are, do very important research too, and also on the development of Latvia's regions?
I think in principle this is a step in the right direction, because, for example, after being in America, after being in Japan, I have seen universities where you would have their budgets close to that of our country, meaning that research and development requires a lot of money, and you would need a lot of specialists who would need to be paid respectively. So it is a good idea if the universities want to keep their status, want to achieve research outputs and are able to attract students, because one of the things why the cities themselves are so interested to keep the universities is to provide for their future, to keep the young generation there in place instead of all going to Riga, which is a very attractive choice for many. And hopefully this will be a change not only in name, but also will give an opportunity to decrease administrative expenses, because it is almost the same issue as for the administrative reform, because we know there are a lot of administrators, a lot of deputies, a lot of people responsible for some functions. Perhaps this will be a chance to optimize this part of the university organization and allow to spend more money on specialists, including foreign specialists, to raise their profiles. Because if the universities cannot provide an education and research of a world scale, at least the European level, there is no chance that people will stay in regions and there will be any future there.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see because, of course, one of the goals is definitely to go higher up on the rankings, on the top 1,000 rankings, so the three big ones that I mentioned in Riga, are usually higher up there. You discussed this with Carlos and Olevs a couple of weeks ago, but LLU was nowhere to be found from what I remember. They have been in the past, but this time they were not. So, but it's interesting to see if these international rankings would accept like a consortium, a quote unquote consortium, or if they would have to be integrated more closely as a university. I mean, it's something that I've had in the back of my mind for some time already, that it would just make sense that they come together. I do want to mention real quick before we move on to another education-related story. So although there are 6 major universities, there's also a number of state, they're called Augstskolas. So this is... I teach entire lessons, like hour and a half long lectures on the intricacies of the term college, or because college means something completely different in America than it means in Great Britain. But these are...
I could help you in this case. If we talk about these state schools or schools that provide higher education other than universities, here we speak about these institutions that provide education in one direction, for example, in international law, in economics, in art, or some such subject, but usually this one direction rather than multiple as in university.
Yeah. But still, like in America, we would officially call them probably college, because for example, I went to a school called Emmanuel College, which in America usually the term college just means it has one branch, one faculty, instead of like Harvard University, which has the Kennedy College of, or the Kennedy School of this or that. We will not get into that right now. I do want to mention really quick a fun Latvian thing is that Augstskola, so Augst is like high and Skola is school. So it's very funny when a lot of students who are like 25, 30 years old say that, oh yeah, I'm in high school right now. And it's kind of like, are you really? Are you sure? Well, it's possible because, and then also, some of my like 18-year-old students say that they're in middle school, because Vidaskola is translates directly into middle school, but it's the same equivalent in America as high school or secondary school in most of the rest of the world. So do be careful with these terms because it is very funny. And then there's also a number of private institutions as well, both in Riga and outside of Riga. Some of the most famous of the state Augstskolas, which you might have heard of, are Toriba, which is it goes from Toriba University, I think it's called officially in its marketing.
It provides business education mostly.
The ārzemnieki Music Academy, the Latvian Art Academy, and then also the school, the Augstskolas in Ventspils and Rezekne, and also in Valmiera as well, I think falls under this. And then there's some private institutions which are known, Stockholm School of Economics, Riga Graduate School of Law, which Otto knows very well. He was he went there. So, but I think we should do an entire episode someday about the Latvian education system, because I think that would be interesting to do. So, one other thing about the Latvian education system I just want to mention now we were going to cover this a little bit later, but apparently there's a new law that has been proposed to regulate international schools separately from the rest of the education system. So, Otto, can you give a little bit of an explanation on how this is going to work and why this is necessary?
So here there are two objectives. On the one hand, to update the regulation for these schools, because it is originally based on some of the laws from the 90s and some principles of law that were taken then. Of course, the education system has changed since then, and also our country has developed. Also, the other objective is an indirect objective to increase the quality of education and the standards of education in these international schools, so as to attract international institutions to Latvia, because one of the reasons stated by different representatives and institutions in Europe and beyond, why, for example, Latvia is not a good enough candidate, for example, as a headquarters of one or another institution, is the lack of internationally recognized international school, or let's say international school that would provide this European education standard, similarly as it would be, for example, in Belgium, in Austria, in Switzerland, or in other places where you would have a number of international institutions, a lot of diplomats, a lot of other agents, and that's certainly one of the things that they think about, is where they will put up their children during this time.
Yeah, so that's I think we'll also cover international schools as well when we do our episode, which now I'm just kind of talking about aloud right now. But now that I've said it on the podcast, it has to happen now. So that's a good way to hold my feet to the fire. And by the way, that episode about the Riga election, we will actually do very, very soon. We're going to be doing it in the next week and a half or so, now that things are actually kind of clear, because there's still even now a lot of uncertainty about about the platforms and everything like that. So we will be putting that together. We have not forgotten. Okay, now let's get to another very interesting story. Now, when I opened up the show document this morning, so Otto had put it together. I was very, very lazy this week, and I had a few extra stories in here. This was the number one story, but since I do have the hosting chair this week, I very selfishly put the story that has to do with the place I work as number one, and I put Otto's favorite story down a little bit, but still a very, very important story, and one that is very near and dear to Otto's heart as somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about taxes. So this is about a health tax that is going to be introduced, which will also decrease the income tax as well. So Otto, I know that this is something that you have studied quite deeply. Can you explain what exactly are the mechanisms behind this? How will this actually affect people positively and negatively? And most importantly, is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, certainly we can say that there are many aspects of why this is a good thing. For one, this seems to give some kind of response to one of the biggest issues on the minds of the people in the coalition, because the health financing has been a major issue, especially since the pandemic and the issues associated with not only the claims of one party to increase the health budget, but also by the issues raised by the people who actually work in the healthcare, especially about the bonuses that were promised due to the extra work that they had to do during this health crisis. So they have found a compromise, which also seems to be something that could also help better the coalition to survive, to put it diplomatically, as they have agreed to decrease the income tax from 23 to 18% to fund this, meaning that the total burden of taxes will not change. Only out of it, specifically 5% will go to the healthcare budget.
So just to be clear, so that 5% is still coming from income. So that still technically sort of is an income tax. It's just specifically earmarked for health.
Yes, and this is apparently our way of introducing a sort of a national health insurance of sorts, only by doing it by a specific tax. And it also indicates the one of the first changes that were intended by all kinds of proposals for changing the tax policy, meaning by decreasing the variety of tax regimes, as this 5% health tax will also be paid by people who are paying the micro enterprise tax, which is also likely to be phased out as the tax regimes are changed, and by others who have, for example, different rate of tax because they are paying it for like royalties and other kinds of payment that are different than, let's say, the usual, for example, working in a school and receiving a fixed salary and fixed payments of tax.
So we will keep an eye on this. I don't think has this officially been accepted yet. I think that this is still in the pretty early phases of being drafted up.
Well, I think that they have agreed it in coalition, and so we have to wait until that is written in law.
So I have good news and bad news when it comes to COVID. The bad news is that the amount of cases, new cases per day, has tripled compared to what it was a couple of days ago. The good news is that what it was a couple of days ago was 1, and now it is 3 yesterday. So, so far it's been so good with COVID here in Latvia. We still haven't had a day where there's been more than 5 new cases. I don't remember in how long now. I don't think it's been weeks, hasn't it?
Yes, and there have been like many days where you had no cases at all. So our situation has indeed increased.
So although I'm making some morbid humor right now, which I apologize for those of you who do not find that funny, but I thought it was kind of funny. I won't be nervous, unless tomorrow there's 6 cases and then the day after there's 9, then I will be worried. But this looks more to me like a little blip. But when you guys are listening to this a couple days from now, you will know what this actually is. But so far it's been so good here in Latvia. There's been really no cause for concern. People are ask all the time, and I'm sorry that we don't discuss this more, because I know that this is something for those of you listening in America and the UK and other places where COVID is still a major issue. That's the number one thing in your mind, and how can you not be talking about that in Latvia? But that says it all, because Otto, when you're out in public, do you see anyone thinking, in the back of their mind, like, I should be social distancing or anything like that? It's basically life as normal here.
Exactly. You take the train, like no one is wearing the masks anymore. I think it's almost the same for the Riga public transit. Now also they have lifted the restrictions. Now it's possible like to get together like 1,000 people indoors and 3,000 outdoors. So all in all, if you wouldn't read the news, you would think it's almost the same as in February, except the weather.
Yeah. And you do still see, for example, I think on the trains they don't want you to sit more than 2 meters apart still, and there are still these, for example, any store that you go into, there's still a sign that says please keep 2 meters apart, but people don't. And there is still hand sanitizer you can use, but it's not something that's flying off the shelves or being replaced constantly. And we'll have to see. So hopefully we're very, very lucky. Hopefully this is the end of COVID here in Latvia. I've got a bad feeling it's not, but we'll have to see. I hope we don't look back on this kind of summer as the summer of folly before everything got worse. But for now, COVID is a non-issue here in Latvia. So one thing that one minor related story. If you remember a while ago, we were talking about how medical care workers have, they were promised some bonuses. And I'm just going to read it exactly as Otto wrote it in the show doc right now. Medical care workers to receive the promised bonuses. Now, that also probably sounds to you like a non-story of, okay, yes, they were promised the bonuses, they're going to receive it. How is that an issue? Well, when it comes to promised salary increases and bonuses here in Latvia, that's not always the case. Because, for example, we've had issues with doctor salaries, teacher salaries. We did a whole episode about it, a couple of months ago. And just because the coalition promises money doesn't mean that there is actually money to spend. So, Otto, do you think this is turning over a new leaf of when the government promises, some kind of bonus or salary? It means that there actually will be. Is this the beginning of better governance?
Well, always in politics in any country, you have promises, but then you usually have to have concerted action to actually get it in a reality. And in this case, the medical workers have done a good job in organizing themselves, and also the coalition has responded, also taking into account the COVID that has certainly help the case of the medical workers in this situation, and the Minister of Finance has actually signed the order to pay out this money. So this promise has come true.
So, do you think we should do some rapid fire stories before we get into some very interesting international issues?
Let's do that.
So the first one that we have here is the National Development Plan for the years 2020 to 2027, and it looks like Parliament has officially approved this National Development Plan. So we've talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, but as a quick recap, what are some of the kind of biggest takeaways from this plan? What are some of the biggest strategic kind of, guidances here in this plan?
So for anyone who is listening, and who's for anyone who is interested in where the public money go in our country, that is probably the first document that you have to look at, because the National Development Plan gives the government priorities for a number of years. So this medium and long-term planning, and here you would have a number of ideas and objectives worth approximately 40 billion euros. So of course that is more than the expected money for it would be, but that's why you have a certain number of priorities, and you would have practically most things that the government intends to achieve, starting from the 2% for defense spending, and probably also the acoustic concert hall, let's say any new bridges, the high-speed roads, also the procurements for the railways. All major points of public spending go in there, and they are prioritized, which then also helps not only the government and the ministries, but also any observer from aside to understand what will be built or developed or executed or not.
And is it possible to read this plan? Has it been translated into English for non-Latvian speakers? Because I know the Latvian plan is available on the cabinet minister's website, but is it available for Latvian speakers too?
Well, I'm not sure if it has been translated yet, but I know that the derivative plans, because for example, each ministry then has a specific plan of what they are planning to do, and I know that because when I was working in one of the ministries, I was in charge of doing that, and we did have also a translation in English, also perhaps in part that we were dealing with international affairs and defense, but certainly if you would go to the websites of the ministries, these priorities that they announced there are certainly based on that, because if you have a point or objective in the national development plan, then usually it would have some kind of resources attached to it.
Now, another story, which this is interesting. So we talk about the Rail Baltica project quite a bit, because Otto and I are both very big fans of train, rail infrastructure, everything like that. So Rail Baltica, for a lot of you who listen to the show, you're also members of the Expats in Riga, it's the Expats in Latvia Facebook group. And Rail Baltica became surprisingly controversial a couple days ago, because there was a very lively discussion over whether or not it is a sinister plot by the Chinese to exert more influence in the region, which maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that might be part of it, or whether or not the project is worthwhile, whether or not there will be a modal shift, whether or not it's going to be economically beneficial. But anyway, it is continuing. And one very interesting little tidbit was that Bauska. So for those of you who have been to Rundale Palace before, who have gone through, who have gone from Riga to get there, you've been through the town of Bauska. We actually recommended it last week in our tourist destinations of places you should visit. So Bauska is pining to get a Rail Baltic station, because Bauska is one of the many major towns in Latvia which is without any kind of rail connection with Riga, or at least passenger rail. And they are apparently trying to expand their borders to increase their population, on paper, so that they would be eligible for the Rail Baltica station. Now, that sounds like a cool plan, Otto. Is it going to work?
Well, I think it's similar to the idea of the university to make a consortium. And here, as Bauska is expanding, it is going forward, it will have more than 10,000 inhabitants. Currently, it's a little bit below. However, this 10,000 threshold is the one required for a city next to this railway line to be eligible for a station, should it be a passenger or cargo. Because as we know, it will not only be passenger stations, it will also be a number of cargo stations, which is also very important and would provide plentiful of economic opportunities.
Yeah, and I think in any case, it would be ridiculous if they didn't build a station in Bauska, because Bauska is, although the population is decreasing as the population is everywhere in the country, I think that's one thing that would definitely help it is by having a station, because one of the worst things about Bauska is that there is no train connection and you have to take buses, which Otto and I, as much as we love trains, we hate buses with a passion, because, for example, Daugavpils and Olaine are two other similar sized cities. People have in their mind, one of my favorite stupid little, parlor tricks, which I like to play, which I don't think anyone actually finds interesting except for me. I ask people what's bigger, Olaine, Daugavpils, and Bauska, and they always say, oh, well, Bauska's the biggest, and then, probably, Daugavpils is the second biggest, and Olaine is the smallest. It's actually completely flipped around, and I think one of the reasons is because Olaine has a very active rail connection with Riga, and it's also the closest. Daugavpils also finally has a passenger rail connection again with Riga twice a day, so you can commute back and forth to Riga, and it's pretty popular, and Bauska does not. So although Bauska was the biggest at one point, I think a lot of the flight has been because of that. There's no good rail connection, so Rail Baltic would be a great rail connection. Do you agree, Otto?
Oh, exactly. I think it would give a lot of opportunity, not only for Bauska, but also for the whole of Zemgal region.
Uh-oh, our rapid fire jammed because we started talking about trains again. So let's continue. So speaking of the regions and also the cities around Riga, so apparently, according to the most recent information which was just published, so as of the beginning of the year, roughly 1/3 of all inhabitants of Latvia lived in Riga. Is that a surprise, Otto?
Well, certainly not. You know of all the economic attractiveness of the city and the opportunities, such as the higher education that we just discussed. Many young people choose to go there after high school, so there's no surprise. Also, many of the expats, probably many of the people that are listening to us, are also living there. And, it is the question of opportunities, of chances for economic mobility, and many people who utilize that. And therefore, it is the question also where we are investing what, is the question of infrastructure, the question of services, and people who, of course, are free to choose which would be the best place for them to live.
Yeah, and I was having this discussion with my neighbor pretty recently about the pros and cons of living in Riga and Jelgava and this and that and everything. And this is a pretty common conversation that I have with people. But we're talking. People have this idea that the apartment prices in Jelgava are significantly lower than they are in Riga. Well, they're lower because Riga, it's just astronomical compared to the rest of Latvia. Not compared. Again, if you're coming from London, you look like what? That's astronomical. I mean, give me a break. That's chump change. But compared to the rest of Latvia, it's astronomical. In Jelgava, it's still pretty high. And the other thing too is that although you are paying significantly higher to live in Riga, the salaries are much higher, and also just the convenience. A lot of people have this idea now. It's becoming more and more popular again to move out of to Riga into areas around it, but at the same time, there is all that traffic, there is all that hassle of getting in and out, and for a lot of people, they're very happy, having to pay more and just living in the city. So
Exactly. You could see that in the case of Jelgava, where actually the most intense train commute you actually have on the line between Riga and Jelgava, because there are a lot of people who work in Riga because they either cannot find a good enough job here, or perhaps have a job of their preference in Riga, so they actually live in Jelgava and commute to Riga, as actually I did for a number of years.
But do you know one thing that I love about not living in Riga?
Tell me.
One thing I love not living about Riga is driving around the streets and not being worried that at any given second that the ground might open up underneath me and send me to the pits of Mordor, as has been happening continuously in Riga. Now, I'm going to I'm going to just read the show doc verbatim again, because Otto put this perfectly. A car sinks into another Niels hole on Gertrudis Street in Riga.
Let me salute a former mayor of Riga. You know who you are.
Yes. So for those of you who have lived in Latvia for more than a couple of months, so you do remember Niels Ushakovs, who was the mayor of Riga for 10 years, and who we've done entire episodes about his handling of Riga city government. But one thing that was not handled very well was the not necessarily just the road infrastructure, but the pipe infrastructure. Because what's been happening is they did this pipe pressure test, and apparently the test did not go very well, and the sand around the pipes has liquefied, or apparently I don't understand exactly the mechanics behind it. It's been explained to me by people much cleverer than me, but apparently there's a lot of sand in the pipes, or is it around the pipes?
No. So the pipes ought to be clean, but the problem for much of Riga is that the soil is very sandy. So if you have a high pressure pipe that comes open under the ground, then usually it will then wash out the sand, and with it the material that holds, let's say, the same cobblestones and the streets upon it. Which is the case in Gertrud Street, and was also the case in the 3 or more other cases around Riga. So imagine if you would have this water stream washing out the sand, and so in some time you would have nothing that supports it, and if a car which weighs a couple of tons goes over it, so as you can see, that is what's happening.
Yeah, and for those of you who have been paying attention the last few years, you will remember that a lot of these streets have been renovated and re-renovated and re-renovated again, and now they are being undermined by this interesting system. But legitimately, I mean, like I'm driving to Riga on Friday, and I'm a bit worried because I'm driving through the center where this has been happening, because I have to go to a doctor's appointment, that my car is going to end up in the other side of the universe or something. I'm going to end up in a black hole.
Probably, at least in the near future, you may want to avoid Gertrud Street or like some other streets where you would have cobblestones. Probably the ones with asphalt are safer to use. Probably all in all, it's not a major problem, but where it comes up, that's certainly something that we will not be able to avoid, because unfortunately, with all the improvements that the previous administration brought to Riga, many of them unfortunately were only in the fields that meet the eye instead of where it doesn't. And it will be a heck of a job for the next administration to take care of that.
Two stories to finish things up real quick before we go to international. So one which was very interesting, and sadly this is not as it sounds too good to be true, and it kind of is. So apparently between 5 and 6 a.m. on July 6th, this is according to the English version of LSM, so there were negative wholesale electricity prices in Latvia for the first time in history. So the prices went, I guess, down to negative 6 cents a kilowatt hour, if I understand, or negative 9 cents per megawatt hour. What in the world does that mean? Because I don't think I got paid to use electricity, Otto.
I think it might be something similar as with the negative oil prices in the United States. We have the Nord Pool electricity exchange, meaning that the electricity markets of the Baltic states and the Nordic states are sort of working in the same market, and there are the rules of demand and supply. And apparently, when the demand is so low, apparently the market price can even go under, as was also the case with the oil. There's also the difference daily, when during the day, during the peak hours, the electricity price, both in the Nord Pool exchange and also in other places, is much higher than it is during the night, which is one of the ways how, for example, this hydroelectric pumping storage system works, where, for example, you would run the water and get electricity during the day, and then use the same electricity during the night to pump the water back, because it's cheaper to do that in the time when no one is using it. So those are market forces, and hopefully we are able to use it to our benefit as consumers.
And the last story. So apparently, for those of you who are big into fishing here in Latvia, which is a lot of you, because that's one of the great things about Latvia, is that there's so many great places to go fishing. So apparently a 2-meter long catfish was caught, and it was apparently, this can't be right, it was 60 kilograms? Is that possible? How is that even?
Oh, yes. And this is the case in our largest Daugava river, where you have these large catfishes. And it is actually also not the largest one that has been caught. You have had even a little bit longer. I think you have had, 2 meters and 20 centimeters. And I think the largest one weight-wise has been, up to 80 kilograms, or like close to that. There was also one which was even like 100 kilograms. So not to make people wary of swimming in Daugava, although there are certainly some places that are much cleaner to do so. For all the ones who like to cast and like to fish, certainly this is a very great opportunity, especially at this time of the year. Also, let me give a shout out to my friend Paul Sullivan at the National Defense University. Once there is a possibility to come to Latvia, that's certainly also one thing what people who are into angling that could do.
Yeah. So when I first saw the story and I saw something about catfish, I was thinking about the catfishing, like lying to somebody about who you are online, and but I guess I'm literally worried that I might be swallowed by one of these catfish. I mean, you have to check out this story. Well, I'll put a link on the Facebook page, even though it's a bit old. But this catfish looks like it could literally swallow somebody. I really had no idea that they could possibly get this big. I mean, that thing is just massive. So
I have heard stories that there are a number of these cities alongside Jelgava, and I have heard from more than one person that their parents used to frighten them when they were like children, that, well, if you go and swim alone in Jelgava, then a big catfish could take you away. And so it was probably more than a little white lie.
Okay, so it is time to get into some very interesting international stories. Now, this first one, I want to give a shout out to Kristaps Andressons of the Eastern Border podcast. So he was kind enough to give us a shout out a couple days ago, and on his most recent episode, I think it should still be the most recent episode by the time you're listening, he did pretty much an entire episode about what Otto is about to also explain about the new constitutional amendments in Russia. So definitely give that a look, and he covers that in more depth than we obviously will right now, because that's the entire point of his show. But Otto, obviously this is something that we do have to worry about here in Latvia and take a look at. So can you explain what exactly these constitutional amendments were, and how this can affect the security situation here in the Baltics?
So, as we heard in the news, and Russian media announced it very loudly, was that the Russian national vote has affirmed the constitutional amendments that do include letting President Putin remain in his post until 2036, which would mean that probably for the rest of his lifetime we will have the same president in Russia, which also gives way to certain implications to the relationship of Russia and Latvia, and the Baltic states, and Europe. On the one hand, it is not a surprise, especially after the controversy that has included wide allegations of fraud. At the same time, it seems the case that unless there are some violent change of the political positions in this country, the current course will remain the same, and so will the dynamic of the relationship between Russia and its Western neighbors. On the one hand, for analysts, it would probably give more of stability because we have had the chance to observe and analyze Mr. Putin in his role since the beginning of the millennium. At the same time, it probably does not give us hope that our relationship would become warmer in the near future, or probably for the most of our lifetimes.
And, the one comment I will make, though, is that, if Mr. Putin was replaced by somebody, there is no guarantee whatsoever that that person would, want to make a better path. So a lot of people have this fantasy of like, oh, we just have to wait until Putin's gone and then everything will be great, with Russian and, Baltic relations. But that is not necessarily the case at all. So, that's a lot of wishful thinking. But we will have to take a look. And again, if you are interested in hearing more about this, you can listen to that episode on the Eastern Border podcast. Go over there on your favorite podcast app. Now, speaking of election fraud, so there was a list that was published just a couple of days ago, which 5 Latvians found themselves on themselves. This is the European Platform for Democratic Elections. And so this was a database of, I guess the official translation in English is fake election observers, or politically biased election observers is the more polite term. And so these are people who have gone and served as quote unquote election observers, because of course in any election you have certain international observers who aren't there checking to see who votes for who, but just to make sure that there aren't people wheeling in ballot boxes into a back room and using a photocopier, like any of these obviously irregularities that you hear about in a lot of places.
And you would also have people who go there on business trips, enjoy the hosting nation's hospitality, and then after 1 or 2 days staying in the said country or territory would come out with allegedly qualified statements on the validity of this vote.
Yeah, and so these 5 people who were put on this list, these are not a who's who list of the most well-known, well-respected, unbiased, politicians in Latvia. Almost all of these names are pretty infamous here in Latvia for...
let me say that, they are certainly elected to their positions. They have a popular mandate, at least of part of the society. At the same time, they have been at the center of a variety of controversies.
For example, Miss Tatiana Zhelonka, who we talk about quite a bit. So she is a member of European Parliament on the from the Russian Latvian Union, and she is somebody who's quoted very often in Russian media as the European parliamentary member who thinks differently or this or that. So it comes as no surprise that she has gone to some of these Russian elections and said that everything is absolutely fantastic and wonderful in these elections. So she is the most famous name here. But one name that was very not surprising to me, again, I'm not shocked to see him on this list, but a little bit less expected, was Mr. Armand Krause, who is the official, I think he's still the official leader right now of the ZZS party, the Ārzemnieki. But so this is the party, for those of you who are into Latvian corruption scandals, this is the party that has been patronized by Mr. Mr. Ventspils. Jesus. Why? Yeah. Why? This is the party that has been patronized for years by Mr. Ivars Lembergs from Ventspils, the mayor of Ventspils, but he is not the official member of the party. He's not the official leader of the party. Mr. Armand Krause is. Mr. Krause was also the candidate for Riga mayoral election, I think, the last time around. So he apparently, as Otto kind of laid out, went to Azerbaijan and apparently kind of served as a quote-unquote election observer there, said that everything was fantastic, although it clearly was not, and is now on this list. And he's very unhappy about being on this list, by the way. He made a very big fuss about it, so we'll see if that goes anywhere, but I don't know. I have a hard time believing that he's going to get himself off of there. So moving on, one just really quick thing I'll just mention in passing. So we've been talking about the banning of different Russian channels for a number of reasons. Again, this is something that we'll probably talk about in a future episode in more detail. But this one is specifically RT, which is very well known in America. So Lithuania apparently is also considering banning this channel, as Latvia has decided to do so. But we will talk about this more in the future at some point, because that deserves a much longer discussion, which we are not going to have right now. But one other story that has to do with Lithuania and Russia has to do with environmental damage caused by Russian oil wells in the Baltic Sea. So Otto, what exactly happened here, and why is Lithuania protesting?
So apparently there has been some pollution and environmental damage caused by the Russian activity in drilling for oil in the Baltic Sea close to the Lithuanian border. And as we know, this would be the case in Kaliningrad, which is a Russian exclave between Lithuania and Poland. And it also affects Latvia because, as we know, the Lithuanian maritime border is very narrow, and not far from that you would also have the Latvian border. So if you would look at the map there, you would have, let's say, a Kaliningrad region, and then right after you would have the Curonian Bay, Liepāja, and right after that you would have Liepāja, so in a very short distance. So there is certainly worry that it would affect Lithuanian maritime coast, which is also a very popular tourist resort, and also very popular among Lithuanians because that's their only sea border. And of course, we should also be worried because if something goes wrong there, as we have known historically, it could be the case, as we all remember the accident at the Bay of Mexico. Certainly, if something like that would happen there, then of course the Latvian seaside would be affected as well.
Definitely. So a couple other stories real quick. So we had a question on our Facebook page, because this was one of the stories of the day, which, by the way, if you are not somebody who has liked our Facebook page, Latvia Weekly, you should go there and press like or follow, because Andres and Carlos, one of our two Carloses who actually help out on the show, they do these stories of the day every day, so you can keep up to date with what's happening in Latvia more than just once a week when you listen to the show or watching on YouTube. But we had a question about this story. So this was about the European Commission supporting Latvia investing 250 million euros into Air Baltic, as was reported by the English version of LSM and a number of other sources as well. And the question was, why does the European Commission have any say in this? Why can't a country just decide to invest capital into one of its own businesses, especially national airlines? So why exactly is this the case, Otto? Because you wrote a very good response.
Yeah. So imagine if we have an economic bloc which ought to work as a common market, and you would have 27 countries where each of the countries would provide state aid to their national companies, private companies, to then be more competitive. Then it would easily be the case that the state with the largest capacity of providing state aid would win the competition game, and we would not have a free market. And for that purpose, the European Union member states have agreed to a principle which is fixed in the Article 107 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, which prohibits state aid, as would also be this. And there are some exceptions that apply. For example, extraordinary occurrences, which the COVID pandemic has been recognized as such, and other cases. For example, you would have also the exception in the case of Germany and the state aid that is given to the territories of former East Germany to overcome the economic difficulties that it had under the Soviet occupation. But in principle, state aid is prohibited not to distort competition and to let free market to work as much as possible.
And our final international story, which we have had quite a few international stories today. So apparently the Baltic Consular Convention has been renewed. So this means apparently that if you have a Latvian passport, then it's good news if you need Estonian, Lithuanian consular services. Would you agree, Otto?
Exactly. So, meaning that if you would be in any other country, should it be, let's say, Cambodia, Australia, Brazil, or whatever, if in case you would have no Latvian embassy or consular service in sight, you could approach the Estonian or Lithuanian consular services, and they would also provide you these services and consular help as if you were their own citizen. So I think that's a great achievement and great thing that it continues.
And just another reminder that although we have our little squabbles from time to time, like brothers and sisters do, we are still brother nations. So definitely just a positive thing all around there. Now, for the week in history, we have one very sad story and one much happier story about that. So although 4th of July was celebrated by most Americans as Independence Day, so the day that we signed the Declaration of Independence, well, sort of, and sent it to the United Kingdom, there is a much sadder 4th of July here in Latvia in the year 1941.
Yes, so we have to remember this date, the 4th of July of 1941, which is also recognized as a day of commemoration in Latvia, commemorating the genocide against the Jewish people. Because on this day, several synagogues were burned down in Riga, also leading to the deaths of many people, and this was also the beginning of many actions against the local Jews under the Nazi occupation. And it was indeed a major tragedy for the Republic of Latvia, as before the war, the Latvian Jewish community was the third largest community after the Latvians and Russians, and out of the approximately 90,000 Latvian Jews that we had, approximately 70,000 were murdered by Nazis and their accomplices, which is why on this day in Latvia we commemorate this event.
Yeah, and this is part of the trend in Latvia overall of over the last few years, definitely kind of making a bigger recognition of what happened during the Holocaust. And President Egils Levits was there and everything. And so, still something that isn't quite talked about enough, and that a lot of people, just aren't educated well enough about. But it is a situation that slowly seems to be definitely improving. But then June 29th, 1920, a much more positive thing, unless you are a baron or a duke or a countess.
So on June 29th, 1920, the aristocracy was abolished in Latvia, and that was a very momentous event, remembering that it had existed in what is now our country for more than 700 years by then. So that was mainly the German aristocracy, the former Crusaders, who after the Livonian War put down their weapons and became barons, the landed aristocracy, and also some Polish aristocrats in the eastern part of Latvia and Latgale, which of course was directly ruled by Poland, and of course had more Polish barons than they did the German ones. This of course was contested by some German organizations back then in the 1920s, but as we discussed many episodes ago, I think it was under the government of Prime Minister Celmiņš in 1925 or 26, the League of Nations accepted that this was a legitimate move, especially as the aristocracy received some compensation for the loss of their privileges and of the land that they received, of course, by conquest.
And for our week in the future, so we are going to be continuing each week to recommend a different place to go visit in Latvia over the summer. So Andreas, who is one of our most dedicated fans, has recommended visiting Aglona, which is a very, very cool place to visit, both because of the major basilica there, which has been visited by 2 popes, and also there's this amazing hill of it's not like I don't want to get confused with the Hill of Crosses, which is near Šiauliai in Lithuania, but there's this hill where there's all these very cool kind of religious objects that have been set up. Some of them are crosses. They're mostly wooden by the local parishioners there. So it's a very, very cool place to pick up, to check out. And if you're going to Ārzemnieki, for example, or Daugavpils, then it's pretty easy to get to. So you've been to Aglona a few times, haven't you, Otto?
Yes, I have. And joining in the recommendation by Andres, I think we can recommend our listeners to visit it in August, and perhaps also this year. It will be the occasion when a major Catholic holiday is celebrated there, and a lot of people gather there for this major celebratory service.
Yeah, and we're going to be hearing soon, people setting out from Liepāja, because people pilgrim from all over the entire country to go there. I would specifically recommend not visiting it then, though, because I'm not a huge fan of those kinds of like massive crowds. But, if that's your thing, it's definitely something to check out. And I will be going today to Temeri, which is one of the places I recommended last week. So I'm going to very selfishly, once again, do the weather this week for Temeri. And well, how wonderful, because today is the best day for the next few days. It's going to be 22 high. It's going to be cloudy, but mostly sunny, from time to time. Just a 3% chance of rain. Now, for the rest of the week in Temeri, my poor friends who live there, it is going to be raining pretty much every single day. There's going to be a higher than 55% chance of rain. Tuesday, it's going to be 20 degrees during the day, 10 at night. Wednesday, it's going to dip down to 18, but go back up again to 20 on Thursday. Friday, 21, Saturday, 22, and then Sunday, the rain will finally dip down to just 25% chance of rain. It's going to be 20, sunny, and partly cloudy in the afternoon, it seems. But then again, who knows what the weather forecast will actually be like that, because, trying to predict the weather, days out in advance is always a little bit of a fool's errand, but we did it anyway. So when you're listening, for those of you who are listening on Sunday, you can see how we did.
Yeah, but one thing that we can say for sure is that Temeri is also one of the places that we recommend to visit. And as I also had the chance to drive through it a week ago or so, I had the chance to see that the water tower is being renovated. The main road in Temeri is also being renovated, so it is becoming nicer than it used to be, and hopefully it will continue in the future.
Absolutely. And wherever you decide to vacation this summer in Latvia, or even if you just stay in Riga, please make sure to swim safely. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, please make sure, as Otto mentioned, don't drink and swim, and also just don't go swimming in a place that you don't recognize.
Yeah. And also one very important advice would be not to jump in even if you know the lake or the river very well. That certainly would be something to avoid, especially as in many places it could be rather shallow, and there could also be a number of objects in the river or the lake that if you would hit them with your head or other part of the body, that could certainly be very traumatic. So please let's avoid that, so as to try to make this summer much better in our memories.
Rather shallow is a great way to describe bodies of water in Latvia in general. So do be careful of that. So thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Have a great week. We will see you probably on Friday or Saturday. We're going to try to, eventually get back into doing live streams again. But we're kind of taking a little bit of time to just relax right now. But thank you all. And thanks to Carlos and Andrew for doing the stories of the day. Please subscribe on YouTube or any of your favorite apps that you listen to the show with. And until next time, Visu Labu.
Visu Labu.